Hello and welcome inside the Fox Weather exclusive Risk of Weather Impact ROWI podcast. Guess what we got lined up for you is a full slate of college football games for this week. A lot of action that's happening, and a lot of this happening down south with some active weather. This is an early look at some of those games that are going to be impacted. Remember, your exclusive Risk of Weather Impact talks about how the game impacts the players on the field, right? And then especially if you're betting on the games, we'll talk about how that could change some of the odds. And if you're doing fantasy, we know this is college football, but in general, we'll be talking NFL throughout the season as well. The fantasy lineup, we'll be talking about how that's impacted. So, Risk of Weather Impact. Let's get into some of the big matchups that we have. A lot of these games are going to be out of Florida, but I want to hear from you. If you are a listener and you're saying, hey, I want you to talk about some of the games in my backyard, you can always reach out. I'm at WeatherBender on any of the social media. But here's the lineup, by the way. On Thursday, we got Boise State at South Florida. Then we have Jacksonville State at UCF. On Saturday, we take it to Texas versus Ohio State, probably the biggest game of the week, no doubt. We got Alabama at Florida State, South Dakota at Iowa State, LSU at Clemson, and then rounding it all out, Notre Dame at Miami. So a lot of action that's going to be happening, a lot of ranked opponents. By the way, we had some epic video that came out earlier this week out of the desert Southwest impacting one of the stadiums out there. If you stay tuned for the very end, we'll dive deep into what they saw in areas of Arizona. But you have to stick around for that. Let's dive into the Risk of Weather Impact. If you're a first-time listener and you're saying, okay, what is this? What's the ROWI that this guy keeps yelling about and talking about? Well, it's going to be with all the numbers that you see on the screen right there. We're going to dive deeper into that, but it's kind of a comprehensive weather analysis of all of this. And we start talking about the specific details of the forecast and, again, how it adjusts the game. There's going to be a scale. You're going to see 0, low, medium, or high. And so that's when you start thinking about, okay, how does this overall change the dynamic? Is it minimal? Is it a 0 or a low impact where you're only seeing minor kind of adjustments to the game? Or is it a medium and high where now you're seeing an overhaul where not only specific positions, but even the coaching and the style of the game starts to change drastically because of what's happening outside? So we're going to dive into that. Let's start off with what you're seeing right now. Boise State at South Florida, Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. This is 5:30 p.m. on Thursday. That's right. We got Thursday football. I love it. I got a niece that goes to USF. I got a brother that went there as well. Love me some Tampa, but during this time of year, and we got a lot of action. We got cold fronts that keep falling through, and once they hit Central Florida, they become stationary, right? And think about this. If you've never heard about a stationary boundary, it's when the offensive line meets the defensive line. It's in the trenches, and neither one is budging. You're not giving up a sack. You're not giving up a yard for loss, but you're also not paving the way for the running back at all. It is a stagnant kind of just stalemate that ends up happening. That's a stationary boundary, but just up in the atmosphere a few thousand feet, of course. So with that, it allows rain to really start to set up, and that could be a big impact. Notice where we've broken down the different type of weather. We got precipitation impact, wind, and temperature impacts. Notice the biggest one for this game, that's going to be the precipitation impact. Overall, when you average all this together, a medium risk of weather impact. As we get closer, though, this is one to watch because notice it's the beginning of this game. It's that 5 o'clock window right off kickoff. You got the energy that's coming out. You got the nerves. It's the first game of the season. You're trying to prove to the coach why you should be in. And, well, now you got a little bit of rain. By the way, it's not even just the rain. You see the feels like temperature? Woo, man, I grew up down in Florida. I played some ball down in Florida. Mid-90s hits different once you're out on the field. So this is a game to be watching closely. Of course, when you're starting to think about Boise State, they lost Ashton Jeanty, right? So they're a ground and pound running type of team, and now they're doing a running back by committee. That could actually help them in this lineup because if this turns into a run game early, just because of the rain, right, and you're starting to be consistent, you want to create some of that momentum, you want to get some good kind of looks early on, running back by committee is going to be your best choice in this suffering heat. I'll tell you, though, the USF, they got some athletes out there. I love watching them. Both of these teams throw up a bunch of points. The total is 63 right now if you're on the betting line. Something I would watch for is if this rain expands throughout the game, that would probably force more of a run attack. That would force USF to do that, and then I start thinking about the under. But right now, with all of that energy, it's week one and a lot to prove for Boise State, ranked 25 without Ashton Jeanty. I like the line. I like 63 and just above that. So that's game one, right? Hopefully that warmed you up to see how we're going to be talking about the risk of weather impact. Now, let's get into my alma mater. I played some ball for UCF 2 years. I was just kind of like a walk-on there. So a practice squad dummy for the best of 2 years. And you'll see Jacksonville State takes on UCF. UCF, we need this, right? Part of the Big 12. Last year was rough. FBC Mortgage Stadium in Orlando, I-4 corridor. So not too far away from Raymond James, right? You're just talking about a couple-hour drive. And this is going to be a later game. Remember, when was the risk of weather impact for Boise State USF? It was early in the game. Since this game starts later, that 7 o'clock window, that's what's keeping it at a low threshold the entire time when you're thinking about just the rain aspect. But look, even that late into the night, you're talking at kickoff, feels like temperature 89. So it does keep it relatively mild for Florida standards. By the way, UCF just coming out earlier this week saying Cam Fancher, he's going to be the starting QB, and they're an 18-point favorite. So I love it. I'm going to go with the Knights. I think they're going to be throwing up some serious numbers. Overall, it's a 52 point total. I'm going with the over on that easily just because they're going to be throwing up numbers. They're going to be coming at it. Jack State, by the way, they throw up a lot. I think both these teams struggle on defense at times, and when you don't have any type of weather, that's hampering the play call, right? This is pristine conditions. We're at a low level. We'll be watching to see if any of this evolves, of course, in the days ahead, but we're close to this game. I think you're locking it in right now. If you're a UCF fan, you're saying, yes, all right, let's get a W on the board. Let's create some momentum as we pound through the Big 12 this year. And then you're thinking about if you're betting on this game, the over looks tasty right now. All right, let's get into what we were saying with the big games. You got to be kidding me. I mean, this is so exciting to have this in week one. We got Texas, number 1. Ohio State, number 3. You got Arch finally getting his start as the full-time QB. We know he came in a couple times last year for Ewers, but you're think about this. This is what was wild. Okay, Texas is number 1, but yet Ohio State is the favorite by 2.5 points. This is the first time ever that a number 1 team has actually been an underdog when you're thinking about for the betting in week 1. What'll be fascinating to watch, of course, with this is the weather is minimal impacts, right? So we're not expecting any rain. The temperature's actually really refreshing for this time of year. You're thinking about in Columbus, they're into the mid-60s. Imagine if we had flipped the script and this was them playing later in the season, not week 1. But they're towards the end of the season, and you're thinking about December, how different this dynamic would be. So I don't know if you would actually say weather is going to be too much of a factor in this one when you're seeing the teams go off. I would say something to watch for. Of course, you got Ohio State. They got a new quarterback. He's a 5-star recruit out of Alabama that transferred to Julian Sayin, and they've kind of got an overhaul on the coaching as well. So Ohio State has much momentum, and they're the favorite. There are still some question marks because there's been a lot of offseason changes. Now, obviously, with a program as historic as them, and they're the reigning champs, you would think they would be fine in adjusting to that. Texas Longhorns look solid. Either way, dynamic game, 12 p.m. Eastern, Ohio Stadium in Columbus. Make sure you check it out. Okay, so now you're starting to see we're getting into the ranked games, the high-impact games, and this is one, remember when we were talking early on with this, and we are saying, okay, sometimes the weather will be so big of a factor that you got to start changing the overall game plan. The game, the way it's shaped, the way it plays out completely evolves because you have to address what's going to happen. Well, this is the Northern Florida Tallahassee Doak Campbell Stadium. Florida State taking on Alabama. Alabama ranked number 8. Look at the precipitation impact. It is maxed. It is high. It is full throttle right now. It's a 10 out of 10. All right, it doesn't get any bigger than that. With that, you have the wind impact, 5.4, temperature impact 5.6. What's important to note with this is that with the rain, those thunderstorms can kick up the wind at times, so it can't get breezy, but this is the type of rain. Notice that not only is there thunder and lightning, which could pose a problem for delays, right? That's the only time they're going to stop the game, and that could really mess up with the momentum, especially week 1, right? Isn't that your whole game plan as a team and as a coach? You're just trying to get everybody in rhythm. This could be a game that is kind of broken apart a lot, and you could see some delays, and if not, a slower game just because everybody's deciding to run. So big thing with this, high risk of weather impact because of the thunderstorms and the rain. Remember I talked about that stationary boundary? That is where it is parked. It's the I-10 corridor, panhandle of Florida. You're seeing it Saturday afternoon. I mean, it's the most volatile part of the day when you're talking about weather. You'll see into the mid afternoon, these storms fire up, but it's not a 1 hour window because it's a stationary boundary. It's not pushing. It's going to go from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So if we do see some delays, it could be for an extended amount of time. And it'll be kind of interesting to watch how this evolves overall. We saw FSU do a massive overhaul. They had a dismal year last year. And so they dipped into the portal, and they got a lot of new guys. You got Alabama that's coming out, a historic franchise, of course, and I got a lot of family that went to FSU. I'm a Knowles fan, a diehard fan, and I was looking at this, and it says everything on the paper says Bama, right? Roll Tide. I think the weather is going to be the great equalizer, especially in college football. When you start looking at this type of dynamic setup and you break the rhythm out and you start going to a one type of threshold where it's a lot of run dominant first, I feel like this is actually going to favor FSU. To me, in my opinion, when I'm watching this, because if everything was equal and you're looking at the weather being nice and calm, then Bama, they got a lot of momentum and they're coming in here and they're going to dominate. But with this, I feel like it breaks it up enough. You got Tommy Castellanos. He came from Boston College. He's already called out the Roll Tide. He says, you don't got Saban to save you. I'm coming in, and they're going to be bringing a whole lot of energy. They got something to prove, right? And there's something to be said for that when you're talking about college football. When guys got something to prove and they want to take down a top opponent like Alabama, this will be a fun game to watch. So overall, the big aspect of this is the longevity of the rain event, because it's a few hours. I mean, the game is 4 hours, right? You're looking at rain and thunderstorms the entire time. So almost a delay is inevitable at this point. Temperature's going to be around into the 80s. So we'll be watching this one closely. And the over and under is 50.5. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm starting to look at the under as looking a little bit better here if you're on the betting line, just because if you think about this, I mean, the stops and starts, or if it's just a run game, that keeps the run clock going, of course, nonstop. I think it just keeps the game moving faster. You bleed through that clock. I actually like the under on this as well. All right, that's the high risk of weather impact. You'll see us dive into that. By the way, that's a Saturday game. If you stick with us here on the exclusive Fox Weather, a risk of weather impact type of podcast, we'll be getting into some updates throughout the week. So I encourage you to come visit us back as you come into and you're, commuting to and from work, or you got some downtime and you got about 10 to 20 minutes and you just want to hear how the weather impacts the games this week. This will be a great one to kind of check back into as we get closer to the weekend matchups. We're going to take you out to South Dakota and Iowa State. By the way, Iowa State throwing up the first W out of any team as they went from Ireland last week. They had a sloppy game, but they pulled it out and they won 24-21. They want to build off of that momentum. And so this is going to be at Jack Trice Stadium. This is at 3:30 p.m. into the afternoon. Notice the risk of weather impact is low. And so we're not looking at a widespread rain event, and the temperatures are nice and mild. When you're thinking about this late into the summer season, this is oftentimes where you could have some oppressive heat and it wears on you. But we've talked about those multiple cold fronts that have been working through. Of course, if you've watched this on Fox Weather, we've talked a lot about it. We've talked about it on the podcast already. Those stationary boundaries I mentioned in Florida, well, they originated as cold fronts, and they've been moving through the Midwest, and this is going to impact areas like Jack Trice Stadium in Ames. Their temperatures are nice and mild. Notice the feels like is married to the air temperature, which means there's not much humidity at all. I mean, this is a beautiful setup here for the Cyclones to, kind of build off of that momentum and get another W in this as well. Now, South Dakota, you can't sleep on them because they are the FCS powerhouse. They're number 4 in the FCS poll. So just as I had said in the previous matchup, FSU trying to prove something, so is South Dakota and the Coyotes. So those are always those sneaky ones where they're coming in with a lot of momentum and excitement to play. And you got to make sure you handle business. All right, let's get back into another Southern game. We're going all the way down into Memorial Stadium in Clemson. It's LSU and Clemson. It's the Battle of the Tigers. Now, A marquee matchup. You got number 9 LSU for Clemson, and it's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, so it's an early evening matchup with this, and you'll see a low risk of weather impact. That is ideal. Surprising, too, when you think about the season that we are in right now, because this is where you talk about, hey, if the tropics were active, this would be a game that would look much different. Thankfully, the tropics are quiet, and it's keeping this quiet as well. Another big aspect of this is, just like I talked about for Ames, Iowa, low humidity. I mean, look at this. How good is this game? You're playing for 4 hours, 7 to 10, 11 o'clock, and the feels like temperature the entire time into the 70s, if not into the upper 60s. Dynamite conditions, of course. Clemson is the 3-point favorite out of this one right now. The over and under is 57.5 as well. So, some of the computer models, they do say that LSU is the better team overall. But again, I think LSU, this has happened. By the way, I worked in Louisiana. I love LSU. I've been down there. I got to actually go to Death Valley, watch Leonard Fournette in action. I got to interview him in the locker room, and it was incredible. He thought I was Tom Cruise. I think that's the only reason why he talked to me. It was amazing. But this happens. LSU, there's such high expectations. SEC powerhouse, right? A legacy team, and you now have a major matchup, and the team looks good. And then you start thinking about, okay, can they live up to this? And if they don't, the last 3 seasons, they've had these big matchups early on, and the rest of the season, you're trying to recover from week 1. So something to watch for. By the way, both quarterbacks in this are talking about being Heisman contenders. So it's also going to be setting the stage for that, right? I think it's going to be a showdown. And because of that, by the way, since you got Heisman contenders in both quarterbacks, I would think that 57.5 over and under, I might actually go over on this one, just because I think it might turn into a shootout where they're both trying to prove why they're the guy. All right, we've been blitzing through all the games, but this one, we got some love. All right, we're getting back into a high risk of weather impact. It's Notre Dame at Miami. It's going to be Hard Rock Stadium, Miami Gardens, 7:30 p.m. So again, think about this. In this dynamic with all of that rain, when it sets up through the afternoon and early evening, oftentimes major impacts. But it's not just the rain. At times, the wind could kick up, and then the temperature is suffocating that far south. So it's another ranked matchup. Really exciting to watch. Fighting Irish, they're number 6, and then you got the Canes. They are number 10. High risk of weather impact early on in the game. But look, I can't do this justice. I got a guy that makes this all happen, by the way. J-Rod Jarrett is, of course, the mastermind behind the ROWI, by the way, if you didn't know. That's a special little nugget for you. And he's also a Canes fan. So I want him to take it over here for a second to let you know how good this game's going to be.
Right now for Miami, the key here is really their revamped offensive line against Notre Dame's very talented defensive front. In this game, Hard Rock Stadium is a stadium that can get very, very sloppy, even with rain happening earlier in the day and tapering off as we get into the game later on. It's really that field gets really messed up. Dolphins fans will know that well when Miami plays the day before when there's a rain game. In this case here, Miami and Notre Dame debuting 2 quarterbacks. Notre Dame's quarterback hasn't thrown a pass at the college football level. Miami's quarterback, Carson Beck, love him or hate him at Georgia. He's a talented guy. We'll see what he can bring to the table. But really it is. Miami is a team that wants to run its offense, and that's something that runs its offense through the running game. And that's something that they would love a big sloppy game for. That's something that plays into Miami's favor more so than Notre Dame. As a whole, though, Miami's defense, one of the worst in FBS last year. We knew they had the number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward, and it didn't matter what ended up happening. The offense scored 1 million points. The defense let up 1 million points. Great overall record, not a playoff team. This year in this game, can Miami's revamped defense slow down Notre Dame? Does sloppiness help or hurt Miami? We don't know yet. There's a whole bunch of new pieces on the table. It's really all about what we do know. Miami's revamped offensive line, which is projected to be pretty good. Mario Cristobal is very, very good at building offensive lines through his years at Oregon and at Miami so far. Can Miami run the rock? And does the sloppiness, if you get a nice rain shower early, does that help the Canes later on in the game? Thanks, Steve.
And I love this because, by the way, Jared grew up as a Canes fan, right? Diehard Canes fan. I grew up not liking the Canes, right? Because I had family that went to FSU, 3 siblings that went there. And so you think about the dynasty of the 90s in Florida, those were the two powerhouses going against each other. But Jared and I were talking before the pod, by the way, and it was funny because we were saying that, look, it's whichever team can swim better, because that's what it turns into when you look at how much rain. Notice by 10 p.m., finally the intensity of the atmosphere starts to wane a little bit and we drop down into a medium. But when you're looking at a 3-hour window with electricity, so, okay, that could lead to some delays. Also, it leads to very heavy rain. What I mean by heavy rain, of course, is the rain rate can be excessive, especially for South Florida, right? So you're looking at rain rate that's now torrential, and now you could have potentially standing water on the field. Hard Rock's been notorious for that, while we're joking about a swimming pool. And so, to Jared's point, by the way, I think this actually does favor Miami, because the rain is different from what you would see here than what they would have in Notre Dame at their home stadium if it rained, right? When you think about these thunderstorms down into South Florida, it's the tropics, right? And so this comes down hard and fast. You really can't prepare for it unless you've been in it. And I can tell you what, they've been in it over the last couple of weeks and months as they've been practicing for this season opener. And so I actually think this does help Miami kind of set the stage and allow for that ground and pound type of attack there at Hard Rock Stadium. So there's the games that we have listed for the week. Again, and we encourage you, if there are some games that you think, hey, we need to jump on and give us a nice risk of weather impact, or some game that's in your backyard, reach out to us at Weather Bender or at Fox Weather, and we'll jump on that. But at the start of the show, I said, hey, something out west that you might have missed. We were talking about the monsoon season flaring up, and ASU, that's Arizona State University, the Sun Devils, actually at their stadium had an amazing video of a dust storm, a haboob, that just took over. And they run out on Twitter and said, hey, this must mean the season's about to start, as you watch this dust storm suffocate the stadium. Incredible what we were able to see out of that visual earlier in the week. By the way, the monsoon season continues to stay alive, so we'll be watching that as well as we look at those games out west. By the way, that kind of gets me thinking, gets the juices flowing, of course, and that's what I want to ask you now. Have you ever been to a game, or have you played in a game and you saw a huge weather event like that changed it completely? Reach out to us again. We'd love to talk with you and be able to kind of reminisce and also talk about how it does evolve, because that's all what the ROWI is focusing in on, is how the game changes because of the intense weather. Thank you for being with us here for the full first week of college football. If you haven't already, check us out on Fox Weather. We are continuing always covering the weather events impacting not only the football games, but anything that you have planned throughout the week. Come check us out.